What to do, what to do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendation, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. Lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For the original episodes, the OGs, please visit brothersonbooks.com. And remember, it's a dark and stormy night. You want a drink to warm the depths of your hearts? We at the Brothers on Books go with Encha Matcha, the best matcha for the best brothers. And now our listeners will get 10% off when they use the link or the coupon code in the show notes. I'm Alex Elwell, and with me as always is my brother Jack Elwell. Jack, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Al. We are once again in the same location back in Michigan. Fortunate circumstance, but we are back, and you can see we even have a picture of how we looked as little kids in the background.
With our father in the middle, yeah. So Jack, what book are we doing?
Today we are reading the book Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life
by the Japanese international Hector Garcia.
Hector Garcia. So I picked this book. I've enjoyed now 2 trips to Japan, and my wife has been there like 10 times. And I do like the feeling I get when I go to Japan. I notice the smaller portions, the smaller people, and I notice a lot more people hunched over, kind of walking around doing activities, and that those are actual, old people still moving around. And I feel like you don't really see that in America as much. And so I was interested in learning more about, their practices for longevity and staying busy.
I have to say, just as a disclaimer, we've actually never been to Japan together, but both independently. I feel like my trip to Japan has been very different than your trips to Japan. I went with the family minus you back in 2016, spring of 2016. I think you were studying for a test.
Yeah.
Back when you still studied.
This is one of my, perhaps I would put this in the regret column of, I mean, obviously I didn't know I was going to fail that exam, but had I known I was probably going to fail anyway, I probably would have just gone to Japan with you guys.
If it makes you feel better, I remember on the plane and in our free time for that test, I was preparing for grad school. So I was annotating. I think I probably annotated close to 4 or 5 chapters of like advanced organic chemistry. Those 14-hour plane rides, you get a lot done. Yeah, we were in sort of the boonies of Japan with no with no car, no way to get anywhere, and just mom. I feel like I tell this story quite a bit, but my mom walked up to me with a Japanese bus schedule, and she asked me how to get somewhere. I'm like, Mom, I don't know. Like, I can't speak Japanese.
I can totally see Mom doing that.
So I guess with that said, let's get into the book, Jack. What were your initial thoughts?
So I guess, why don't we start out with what is Ikigai? So I think it meant
Mysterious word.
The happiness from staying busy, I want to say. Essentially, that was kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, the happiness of always being busy. And early on in the book, he brought up logotherapy, which we discussed in Man's Search for Meaning.
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
His therapy. I feel like this book touched on a lot of other books we've talked on.
Yes.
Touched on logotherapy, touched on flow, touched on anti-fragility, diet. I mean, types of diets, types of movements, all things we've talked about in a lot of other books. I don't think we read. We did Black Swan for sure, but did we do Anti-Fragile?
I definitely read it. I don't.
Right, same.
Yeah, so it did talk about that a little bit. So how would you describe logotherapy? It's kind of.
Logotherapy I would describe as like just giving yourself searching for a purpose, like, or or almost like the way I think about it is like setting goals for yourself, something that you can look to accomplish. And if you go back to A Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl talks about in the case study of concentration camp, the concentration camp survivors, it's the people that like had something they wanted to accomplish outside of the camp that had the
Mhm.
highest likelihood of living.
Yeah, I wrote down that quote that I really liked, and he even said in this book, so he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how.
No, the Nietzsche quote.
Yeah. So and I think logotherapy is more like looking towards the future and like in the present, whereas a lot of the Western psychology is more like analyzing the past. And I think one big difference that I wrote down this like both I tried to mind map it actually. So I have like in the West, we kind of focus on what we think, and then that the thought is what we think translates into how we feel, and then how we feel translates into how we act. But in kind of logotherapy, and they had another therapy in Japan that was very similar to logotherapy called Morita therapy, and that was all about the actions control how we feel, and that's kind of I think the big difference.
Yeah,
So that's
even in A Man's Search for Meaning, like Frankl talks about how happiness and success should never be the end goal for
mhm,
something. It should always be doing things that bring you those emotions, like that
yeah.
essentially put you in that state. Uh, yeah, I mean, I guess just simply, I thought the book was kind of broken down into three sections. Like you had your first section. I just, for me personally, I viewed it as like, a purpose of your life. The second section was like kind of movement, and then there's touched on diet a little bit.
Mhm.
And it's like I viewed those as like the three components that lead to a long life, which is essentially what this book's about. Why do these Japanese people live so long? I don't know. Thoughts?
No, I think that was a good breakdown. Um, I don't know which one should we do.
And I think we should just stay on the logotherapy and the purpose stuff,
Okay.
and like why, why do you think that's so important?
Um, well, I think this also comes to how like language kind of influences behavior, because I know there's certain tribes that don't have like a future tense, or if you didn't have a past tense, you wouldn't be able to think about the past, or you wouldn't really be able to discuss the past, and like then maybe you'd be more focused on the present. And he brought up in Japanese culture, there's not really a word for retire like we have
Yeah.
in English or like as an American. So the concept doesn't really exist. So I think the fact that the concept doesn't exist kind of forces them to live in a way where they're not thinking about like just leaving work, I guess. And it's more about finding work that you're gonna like forever.
I'd say one of the other differences is I don't know if we ever talked about this on air, but I feel like we've definitely talked about this with relation to the fire movement. Is that a lot of people, it seems like in the fire movement, just have this concept of retiring, but they don't have an idea of like what they actually want to do when they retire. Like it's just, let's just get there for the sake of getting there. Uh, and then like, it's like, well, then what? Like, you're just going to sit on your couch and watch TV all day, or like you
Hmm.
still have to live. But I don't, it just seemed like when he's highlighting these people in these communities, they all have a true sense of like what they want to be doing. They have like very fulfilling lives. I would say in regards to that, the other like the way the purpose I would say would be broken down is further into they always have strong social networks, like the centenarians or super centenarians or even just people over 80 all have strong social networks. They all are, you know, they're all active, they're all still having fun, like doing things that like bring you joy, not just like vegging around, like how you see a lot of old people here in America where they just kind of like sit on the couch and like waste away.
Hmm.
Uh,
I feel like it's a little easier to optimize or try to just maximize like money stuff, whereas it's harder to maximize happiness, or like purpose.
Yes, yeah.
And oftentimes it feels like some people are avoiding like actually asking themselves what gives them purpose. Um, yeah, I mean, speaking of the centenarians, I mean, if you he goes through like blue zones. Blue zones are the places on Earth that have a very high percent or a higher percentage than normal of people over 100. Um, and they're in California. There's one, Loma Linda. We got Sardinia. We got, I wrote it down, Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and then Ikigai in Greece, along with Okinawa. Um, and should we get into diet a little, or you want to do exercise, or what do you?
I would stick with, maybe let's stick with I guess the diet probably first.
Okay. I mean, I guess one thing is,
I guess just real quick before we transmit,
Mhm.
he touches on the power of flow, like getting into this flow state with your work, your purpose a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, we touched on this. I'm now like blanking.
Mhm.
What book did we touch on this with?
I thought it was the 50th law, but I'm not sure.
I mean, he maybe touched on it very briefly, but I
Mhm.
feel like it was recent. Anyway,
Okay.
just like the state where you essentially lose track of time and you just are so happy with like the work you're doing. And he was mentioning that when you're like looking for your purpose of like whatever you're working, you should like look for things that allow you to get into the flow state where you kind of lose track of time.
Mhm.
Uh,
And he had an exercise that he wanted you to like write down the things that you feel you like enter flow, and kind of try to see the similarities of those activities. So like you might have a bunch of activities where you're moving a little, you might have activities where you're alone or in a group, and then try to either do more of those activities and also experiment if you don't have that many items. Experiment with activities so you can try to find things that give you like the flow state.
yeah, so he actually lists out the 7 conditions for achieving it, which are just knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, knowing how well you are doing, knowing where to go. This is if like you're going like traveling or navigating, perceiving significant challenges, perceiving significant skills, and then being free from distractions.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I remember he brought up, he also referred to like these micro flows where you're kind of getting in the zone just mundane by doing mundane tasks. And I think he brought up like Steve Jobs would still do the dishes, but there was an organization to it. And I think he did, the dishes first, or forks second, spoons third, and he would try to do it faster and better each time. So kind of having some order to the tasks you're doing. Um, that's And then another quote I wrote, rituals over goals, I thought was a good quote to have in mind. And basically not to worry about the outcome. So when you're in the flow state, just you enjoy the ritual, and you don't really worry about the outcome. And that was kind of like, we kind of talked about this a lot in, I mean, I know we didn't actually read Thinking in Bets, but this idea of resulting and separating the decision from any result is kind of an important thing. I feel like it keeps coming up. Um,
yeah,
this is kind of a similar thing.
right. It's like making, as long as you continue to make good decisions, in the end, the outcome will be good.
Mhm.
But the outcome tied to a single decision should not be, you shouldn't put too much weight on it.
Yeah.
Because there's at least in life, there is chance where
Mhm.
a good decision can lead to a bad outcome.
Mhm. And in the end, he kind of like brings it full circle because he says a person needs to not worry about the things they can't control, and they need to have courage to change the things they think need to be changed. And then I think he says like wisdom is the ability to decipher the difference between the two. So knowing what things you can and can't change and having the courage to change the things you think need to be changed. So it's similar vein is resulting in this rituals over goals. I don't know, Al, what activities give you flow?
I definitely feel it. So I actually do, and it makes sense, like from these 7 conditions, I do feel it at work.
Okay.
So like there are some processes at work that, you just know what you have to do. It's not always how to do it, but like you can on the fly kind of figure out what you have to do. And yeah, I mean, like talk about cutting time down. Like there are things that would have taken me all day in grad school that I can now get done in like maybe 2 hours at my job at work.
Mm.
And there are times I'm just in lab and I feel like after a while I'm on my feet a lot and feel tired and feel like you've accomplished, like when I look back at like in the moment when I think about how much I've done, and I think back to like probably 6 or 7 years ago, I'm like, this is a day's work, and it's 10 a.m. in the morning, and I'm like,
Mm.
man, I still have another essentially 7 hours of work left. But
So that's when you go on a bunch of coffee breaks and
I don't take any coffee
so-
breaks because I'm
slow
not
it down.
because I don't work at the UN. But
Okay.
but yeah, like I definitely feel it at work, and reading his 7 conditions, it makes sense of why I would feel that. I also definitely feel it when I play. Like,
Pickleball, you mean?
yeah, play pickleball. Like there are definitely times when I'll be playing and like uh it's like weird. Like so when you talk to a lot of people that play really high level tennis, to me when they describe like sort of being in this state, they
Mhm.
describe it as the ball gets really big.
Okay.
But like when I feel like I'm in this state, to me, it seems like everything really slows down. Like ball just appears to me to move slower,
Okay.
and or I just become faster. But it is, from what I can gather, it appears to be the same thing.
Okay.
What about you?
Yeah, you had a funny quote in there too that I think it was an Einstein quote, and it was
Oh yeah,
it was if you put your I think hand on the
uh,
stove, like a second can feel like an hour, but like if you walk with like a pretty girl, hours can feel like seconds, and that you said like, yeah, that's relativity.
right.
So I thought that was a funny way to think about it. I mean, I wrote down some like reading. I would say I can if I really get in the zone, if I have a good book, uh, I can read for a long time and it doesn't really feel like that tough. I used to feel that way about soccer. I actually wrote like mowing the lawn, constructing things. I remember when I was replacing the floors, I was spending like hours and it didn't really feel like that much work. But like when Elena, my wife came, she said she would help. She was on the floor for like like maybe a half a minute. We were uh picking up staples from the carpet. She's like, I'm done. After like a minute. Like, so like that kind of made me think like, oh yeah, I kind of like doing this anyway. I also wrote down math problems. I used to just do math problems for hours on end. So a lot of these things actually kind of are in um isolate like by myself, which I was kind of surprised about because I also had working out and walking, but walking could be with people. Um,
Right, but it makes sense if you look at this
yeah,
conditions. The last condition is being free from distractions, and
yeah,
I feel like yeah, you're right. Like in constructing things, it's like way easier. You don't have you kind of just lose yourself a lot
mhm,
easier if you don't have someone there to talk to you.
yeah. But I think the one of the important things I got from that is like I in one of the seven you read like you need to know what to do.
Right.
Like if you don't, and I think one of the reasons I got so frustrated working my actuary job a lot of times was there were so many times where I just didn't know what to do. and it just felt like I would constantly have to go ask, and I feel like it's hard to get into, like, flow or feel good about what you're doing when you really don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
Um,
that creates like anxiety.
yeah,
Like you don't know what you should be doing.
yeah.
It's stressful.
So yeah.
So I think it's also like in terms of like goal setting or like purposes, it's like everyone always talks about like having goals or challenges that are like slightly challenging, but not like
Mhm.
right. Because if the goal is too easy, you become bored.
Yep.
If it's too hard, it's like overwhelming. Like you feel like you can't accomplish it. But you
Mhm.
need it slightly challenging that it pushes you, like it stimulates you intellectually, but not like so hard that you're like out of your realm of competency.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so I'm just looking through my notes, moving on. The next section was, I mean, it was called Masters of Longevity, and it was just going through interviews with some of the longest living people in the world. So these were interviews they conducted in Okinawa. Um, or sorry, it starts out in Okinawa, but they interview some other people around the world too. And um, I don't know, anything stand out in some of those.
Well, I guess I don't know. Like if I were to, I mean, the commonalities I feel like I saw amongst all these people is that they one ate. Well, one person did not live that healthy of a lifestyle, but for the most part, they all ate a relatively healthy diet. I felt like they were all still relatively active, not necessarily like lifting weights or going
Mhm.
to the gym, but they're still moving. Like you're not sedentary. I feel like when you become sedentary is when like things go downhill for older age people and they're intellectually still like doing things. A lot of them are talking about gardening, weeding, and things you have to still think about.
Mhm.
So uh and then like the last one, I'll come back to the thinking in a second. And the last one was I felt like they all had strong social communities.
Mhm.
And that's I think that in many regards is the most important, to just be able to surround yourself with people and still be social. The thing I think is important about uh keeping your mind sharp is a study came out of like activities related to longevity, like in sports.
Mhm.
And most of the sports like led to a couple year like increase, like soccer was I think 3 or 4, but then like all racket sports led to I think it was either 7 or 9 average years longer in life. And a lot of it has to do with because you have to translate so quickly between like thinking really fast and like translating to fast movements to like slow.
Mhm.
It's like that the switching between fast and slow so rapidly, at least from
Uh-huh.
what these researchers are saying, like really stimulates the brain.
Okay.
Uh, so I think just sort of extrapolating that to everyday thing, like everyday life, when you're still like mentally stimulated, you're going to keep your brain younger.
Mhm. I mean, another thing with racket sports that came to mind was because in the tail end of the book, he's talking about how people in the modern world barely ever raise their arms over their heads. And like our ancestors were used to like picking tree or fruits and stuff off of trees a lot. And in our world, a lot of people aren't even used to using all of their joints. So they did have some exercise in the tail end of the book that just show like ways to warm up, and a lot of these Japanese do these exercises every day. Um,
Yeah, it wasn't just I mean they had
yeah,
like
yeah,
yoga
yeah.
exercises, they had Tai Chi exercises. What else? There were
There
a
were,
lot of
yeah,
just
a lot of slow movements, but getting all the limbs and
just yeah, like moving
joints.
these sort of I think if you were to see people doing this in a park, you would think it looks sort of goofy, but just ways to really just move your body.
I mean, I like the concept the Japanese have. It's called hara hachibu, and it means fill your belly to 80%. And Elena actually, so my wife actually told me this when we were in Japan about they have this saying. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it existed. That oftentimes when they feel like they're about to get full, they just stop. And it does seem in these blue zones that I think they averaged about 1,800 calories per day, whereas the rest, like in general, I think it was like almost 2,100 calories. So they did mention fasting, or just calorie restriction. Um, and from the interviews, I didn't have too many notes, but I mean, it was kind of interesting. The woman from Ecuador never ate meat in her life. I was kind of, she lived to 116. There was this guy, Walter Brunig. I like this quote: "We're all going to die. Some people are scared of dying. Never be afraid to die because you're born to die." So it seemed like a lot of one commonality I took was like, it doesn't seem like they're like afraid to die, basically. They don't dwell on it. Like they realize they're gonna die. Um, and that goes back to the thing like knowing what you can and can't control and like where to put your worries to. Uh, so and then I guess the next part was interviewing the Japanese centenarians. Um, I mean, I don't have too much written on this part other than 100. It did say 100% of the people interviewed kept a veggie garden. Um, they don't multitask, and they have a lot of variety in their day. Um, so, yeah, are you looking to grow a garden
I actually am.
after reading this book?
I think a garden would be something easy I could put in my backyard, and I was planning on maybe starting, probably not this weekend, but maybe next weekend. I was gonna
Okay.
go get some topsoil and some stones and put them all together in my backyard and try and grow some veggies.
And I guess it's important to say the garden thing was not just in Japan, even though it seems like it's more even than the other blue zones. But a lot of the blue zones, the people kept gardens. So like very low impact, but you're like doing a lot of movements.
Right. Plus, it's a lot of thinking too. Like you have to plan it all out. It sort of I feel like it sort of incorporates everything outside of like the social aspects that we were talking about that's good for life. Like you get a
Mhm.
lot of the benefits of staying active. Like you have to tend it all,
Mhm.
and then you're eating better food. Uh, and it like works your mind. Like you have
Mhm.
to think and like plan out how to plant these things, how to grow them, where they need to be, all that.
That's kind of how I feel about constructing things too.
Right.
Like,
It's a
cause
lot of
it's like applied math in some ways, and you do have to like move and
yeah.
cut things and, yeah.
I remember like before we built the dad's grill, like we spent I don't know, a couple hours like planning it out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that old construction saying, measure twice and cut once.
Yeah.
I remember when I built my mailbox, I like dry built it first, just with no mortar. I just laid the bricks out how I wanted it.
Ah,
I
okay.
spent not a couple hours, but at least, probably an hour like setting it up, at least a couple layers of how I would want to build it.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think you just touched on the food. Like, you want a huge variety in the food you eat. And then the common saying is like you want to eat the rainbow. So like
Mhm.
everything has different colors. They touches on these 15 natural antioxidants found in the Okinawan diet. So antioxidant is something that stops oxidation. It's antioxidation. Oxidation is a process that happens in your cell that usually results in degradation of the cells. It's a natural, not necessarily a natural, but it's like a natural process. It is a process that happens. It usually is resulted and can cause a higher incidence of cancer. So the ones that they're saying are natural in the Okinawan diet: tofu, miso, tuna, carrots. Carrots I thought was sort of surprising. Goya, which is a bitter melon. Kumbu, sea kelp. Cabbage, nori, which is seaweed. Onion, soy sprouts. Hachima, cucumber like gourd. Soybeans, sweet potato, peppers, and sampin cha, which is jasmine tea. And then they talk quite a bit about the jasmine tea. Some of the I guess jasmine tea is pretty big in Okinawa. It
Mhm.
looks like just tea in general. is
Yeah.
very
So-
important.
It sounds like the Sampinsha is really, it says a mix of green tea and jasmine flowers. So, yeah, obviously, yeah. Green tea we're a big proponent of, and I mean, there's even a section here, secrets of green tea.
Right.
You know, controlling cholesterol, lowering blood sugar levels, improving circulation, protection against the flu, promoting bone health, protection against certain bacterial infections, protection against UV damage, cleansing and diuretic effects. I mean, the UV damage that one I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, that
Pretty
would
cool.
sort of go back to kind of like an antioxidant thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I used to live in Nashville, I would go to the downtown YMCA, and there was this old black guy that I used to sit in the sauna with. His name was Whip.
Whip.
His name was Whip. That's at
Okay.
least how he introduced himself.
Okay.
And Whip introduced himself to me probably 5 or 6 times. And every time he would tell me how all he would drink is green tea and how good it was for him. And he never smokes, never drinks. For some reason, he felt the need to tell me he was abstinent. Uh, and yeah, he just always would talk about green tea, like how good it was. He essentially attributed it to getting his life back together.
Okay.
So,
I do feel very zen after having my matcha now, normally. So you don't really have like the crash, I feel like, from coffee. It's more of like a prolonged kind of feel. But yeah. So any other thoughts on well, I guess the other thing, I mean, I know you mentioned they didn't mention there's a fruit in Okinawa they kept bringing up, this shikuwasa. It's a citrus fruit. Said it's kind of like a combo between a lime and a mandarin orange. So I thought that was this. Have you heard of this nobiletin or this level? Or it says shikuwasas contain high levels of nobiletin. Nobiletin. I don't know.
I haven't
But
heard of this.
yeah, but this has 40 times as much of this as oranges. So that was, and it's been proven to protect from arteriosclerosis, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and obesity in general. So that was kind of interesting. I've never heard of that fruit. So they eat a lot of it on Okinawa. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I feel like
I mean, another thing that it kind of had like a subsection for what Westerners could do for antioxidants. And kind of like what you said, like eat the rainbow is probably a good thing to go off of. I mean, oily fish such as salmon, mackerel, tuna, sardines. Thought that was a good one. But they did say avoid, eliminate refined sugar and grains, processed baked goods, and prepared foods, along with cow's milk and all derivatives. I was kind of, I don't know. I mean, I guess I had kind of heard milk was bad, but
I think a lot of it. I just remember going back to. I wish almost we had her on. I just remember Haley, the girl that does our intro, going off on me for a very long time about how bad milk was, like
Mhm.
non-human milk. She was claiming it was like there's something in it that's like addictive. It's like way more sugary and fatty than you need,
Mhm.
type of thing. So
And I mean, I can't remember what book we read on this, but so like, because you kind of have to think like, why do we even domesticate cows? Like, or why are we even consuming milk to begin with? And like cow's milk. And it sounded like that was because cows were able to be domesticated. And it's kind of just like they tried it with zebras. I remember we read about, but the zebras
germs and steel.
that was going to yeah, because zebras they go crazy if they try to be locked up, and they just start like banging their head and like basically killing themselves. Um, so it's kind of like artificial system on why we're having cow's milk to begin with. Um, some regard. So yeah, it's just kind of questioning what you're eating, and but I'm kind of sad because I do like having pizza like once a week. So I might like to be changing that. I don't know.
Could eat vegan pizza.
I could. I don't really know what they use for the cheese. It's like a cashew melted, I think.
Cow's milk.
So I don't know. Anything you're thinking of changing in your diet now that you've read this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm constantly thinking I should change my diet and then I don't. So maybe finally I will actually. I feel like if I could just start cooking more, my diet would be a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah, I always tell myself I drink I mean, I feel like the one really unhealthy thing I do is I drink a lot of Coke. And like my goal is always to like reduce the amount of Coke I drink.
Hmm.
And it's like the reason I drink so much Coke is because it's like free at work. So I can just always get it. And then yeah, so I just always do it because it's free. So having maybe a little more willpower to stop would be definitely good for me.
This really goes back to the environment kind of influences the
yes.
activities you do.
100%.
Because what you're saying, like it resonates with me because I remember I was never a coffee drinker, but there was one company I worked at that had free coffee in the breakout room, and I would make coffee, and I just felt like I was like crashing, and like then I felt like I needed to get more and more. So I think I was up to like, I'd have like 2 or 3 cups, I think, throughout the day. And then you add a little milk to make it a little, sort of taste better. And then soon, like, it's really not good for you. So yeah, change your environment if you're looking to change your habits.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I mean, I feel like those are really it for what I have.
okay. I mean, the last part was gentle movements, longer life.
Like,
I mean, it says, we kind of mentioned this, but Blue Zone suggests not to exercise too much, but to move a lot. And few of the Okinawans were going to like a gym. So they kind of said, don't go to a gym or exercise intensely, but they almost never stop moving.
yeah, it's more about like just gently like walking around, like
Yeah.
sort of like walking around, gentle bike riding, the gardening. I think a lot of it comes back to the gardening because that is gentle movement.
Mhm. And then, back to the meaning of Ikigai, like the happiness from staying busy, they're just like always busy. It's not such extremes of like, oh, I'm gonna go like, run, and then just sit on the couch for hours. Actually, I mean, he was talking about the negative effects just from sitting for like 15 minutes, even.
Right.
Like you really need to get up and move, even if it's only for like a
Couple
minute or just move around every once in a while to get your body going again. Uh,
Yeah,
so
the other good thing about a garden is I feel like it gives you something, it does in a sense give you a purpose and like you feel like you have to take care of it. Sort of like a
Mhm.
pet almost.
Interesting. So you're saying it just provides like a structure to your day, kind of, or like gives you something to.
That you're responsible for. And I feel like we kind of touched on this. And I feel like I've seen this. I remember in grad school when people would be like really sort of depressed, like, a lot of them went and got adult like, for whatever it is, like they were instructed that maybe they should go get a dog. And then like all of a sudden, like they're taking care of this dog and their like whole demeanor is like changed because you're in charge of the dog, but you have to take care of it. Otherwise,
Hmm.
it's like dependent. It's like almost artificially giving yourself something dependent on you that
Mhm.
like takes your mind kind of away from the problems you're having.
So maybe that's why having kids also is good, um, or it could be good
Could right.
to someone's like psyche or how they're feeling.
Yeah, that is some
Perhaps.
right.
Um, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And the very end part, he did get into Nicholas Taleb's Anti-Fragile book that we kind of briefly discussed earlier, but I was kind of surprised to see that book show up here.
It was a lot of them that popped up in this book.
So, but it was kind of interesting that a lot of the Okinawans, and this was to the anti-fragile aspect, very rarely do they have a single income. And I feel like we've talked about this times too, because a lot of people say like you want to be diversified, but a lot of people only have like one source of income. And like the Okinawans at least grow their food. So you could say like that's kind of like a second job. And if you were to lose like your main source of income, then you could devote more time to another source. Um, and he also brought it up in terms of friendships, which is kind of sad to think about, but he's saying like, people fall like, leaves on a tree basically. At some point, like your friends are gonna die off and or they're
part of your life.
yeah, or they're gonna, move away, or for whatever reason, you're not gonna be friends with them. So it's I haven't really thought of friendships as like I need to like diversify my friendships, but maybe there is something to that, because he was saying like people that really put all of their eggs in one relationship, if something were to happen to that person, they would really struggle.
Yeah, you have like no one left.
Yeah. And that's perhaps, I'm not going to say what broken heart syndrome is, but maybe could be like that in some ways. But I think even if you had a bunch of friends, I don't, if one person died, you might still experience very bad effects.
Yeah, of course.
But
But the point is like you would
yeah.
have like a community
Yeah,
to
like a
kind
support
of
system.
like lean on
Yeah.
that could help you through it.
Yeah, I guess what you just said there. One thing that was interesting in Okinawa is it seems like they're like they've organized themselves to have like these family structures, and it sounded like it was coordinated by the government, and like the government will coordinate which volunteering jobs to do. So it sounds like their system is almost more. I would almost say it's kind of like a barter system in some regards. There's less like it's less like money exchanging. It's more just people's time being devoted to different activities to help, um, and they structure these groups that, and I think it did translate to like a family group where people could go voice their concerns or issues they're going through, to kind of like nip things in the bud. Uh, I think I was talking about this with mom, and she said, so like if one grandma knows her son got laid off of work, like she could bring it up at her like family group, and then someone in that group might know of like a job opportunity or something, that grandkid could do for work or
Yeah.
so it's kind of like a cool. Yeah. Community setting to help solve problems. So okay, well,
Probably it for me on this one. It was a good pick.
okay.
Easy to read.
Yeah, very easy to read, quick read.
I think I read it in about 3 hours.
Yeah, and I like that a lot of the exercise had pictures. So if you wanted to just even
Look at the pictures.
yeah,
right?
buy it for the pictures and look through, it's kind of a good reference.
Good
So,
list, what you should
Yeah.
be eating.
yeah. So
So I think this concludes season 9, Jack.
it's hard to believe.
This will be episode, I think, 110.
That is wild. So our next time, I guess we'll have our next
We
book
have the
draft.
book draft, and we have quite a few. I think at least in the next probably 4 to 5 months, we'll have quite a few authors on. At least I think at least three more authors, all returners too.
Yeah.
Pretty exciting.
So we must be doing something semi-right if people are asking to come back on. Or
Right, they want to come back on. So
okay, so with that said, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For the original episodes, the OGs, please visit brothersonbooks.com. I am Jack Allwile, and with me, as always, is my brother Alex Allwile. Al, until next time.
till next time.